Mussolini and his fascists were violent nationalists who believed in the systematic use of violence. Fascist black shirts attacked all who opposed them, like liberals and Catholics, but their main target was socialists, who threatened the revolution like the one in Russia. In October 1922, fascists seized provinces across northern Italy, then marched on Rome in their thousands to demand power through force of arms. The king gave in and made Mussolini the world's first fascist prime minister. He became a dictator. From his earliest days in power, Mussolini's main aim was to restore the glories of the ancient Roman Empire. And his main frustration was the reality of Italy in the 1920s.
Disorganised, chaotic, unstable. That was a far cry from the Roman Empire, when Italy had been great, when it had really dominated the Mediterranean, when it had had its own massive empire. And Mussolini looked back to the past and thought, we should be there again.
Mussolini modelled his behaviour on the Roman emperors. To equal their ruthlessness, Mussolini would betray anyone, even loyal, devoted fascist families ready to die for their country. He would even betray his own family, his son-in-law and favourite daughter. Once in power, Mussolini started to build the world's first totalitarian state, bending all institutions and people to his will. To build a new type of Italian, Mussolini knew he had to start with the young.
La nostra patria.
In 1929, Mussolini and the Vatican signed the Lateran Pacts, giving the Church virtually everything it wanted. The Pope gained control of the Vatican City as a sovereign state and received 1.75 billion lira in compensation for historic losses, mostly in government bonds.
And the government bonds obviously meant that in some curious way, the Catholic Church, the Vatican, was underwriting the fascist state. And people at the time warned this was a very dangerous thing to be doing.
Mussolini knew Italy had to be modernized before he could create a fascist empire to rival ancient Rome. The fascists introduced a policy of self-sufficiency for agriculture and industry. Massive public works programs to drain marshes and build roads created jobs and were hugely popular. But for Mussolini, their main aim was to prepare the Italian economy for war. The first armed conflict came with a popular rising in Libya, Italy's most important colony. In 1933, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Mussolini regarded Hitler as a junior partner who had copied him in his rise to power, but he was jealous of Germany's military power. There was no automatic reason Mussolini and Hitler would be allies, despite their shared views. They first clashed over Austria. Italy wanted it to be independent rather than part of Germany. Hitler, however, had other ideas. In 1934, Mussolini had made Galeazzo Ciano, his son-in-law, head of his press office. Just 4 years earlier, Ciano seemed to have made the best career move ever. Aged 27, he married Benito Mussolini's adored daughter, Edda. This relationship would end in a family tragedy of Shakespearean intensity. But in 1934, Ciano hero-worshipped Mussolini, imitating his gestures, his uniforms, and his speech. Ciano's first job was to ridicule the Führer. After Mussolini and Hitler clashed over Austria, Ciano briefed journalists that Hitler was a madman, hell-bent on world war. In 1935, fascist forces invaded Ethiopia, Africa's last independent nation. Ciano was among the 600,000-strong Italian invasion force. He took part in bombing raids on civilians and proudly boasted,
"We have carried out a slaughter."
The way that Mussolini dealt with the Ethiopian question, I think, shows just how calculated and ruthless the man really was.
The Ethiopians fought back desperately.
So then the order was issued by Mussolini in December 1935 to make widespread use of chemical weapons, mustard gas and phosgene, and to use terror tactics en masse.
The Italians even deliberately bombed 19 Red Cross hospitals. Over 250,000 Ethiopians were killed in the fighting. Mussolini's aggressive foreign policy was hugely popular at home, but poisoned relations with Britain and France. Mussolini knew that in contrast to Britain and France, he had Hitler's backing in Ethiopia. And then both dictators backed General Franco when he rose against a left-wing government in Spain. Mussolini sent 80,000 Italian troops to fight for Franco in the ensuing Spanish Civil War. As the European crisis mounted, Mussolini promoted his 33-year-old son-in-law Ciano to the key post of Foreign Secretary. Ciano started to keep a secret diary, which survives as one of the most remarkable insider accounts in 20th century history. One of the first entries describes Mussolini's visit to Hitler in Berlin in 1937.
Mussolini captured crowds with his magnetism, his voice, and his impetuous youthfulness. Will the solidarity of the regimes be sufficient to keep two nations whose race, culture, religion and tastes are exact opposites really together?
But Ciano knew that there was no alternative to the Nazis if Italy wanted to challenge the power of Britain and France.
Today, the Rome-Berlin axis is something very real and extremely useful.